The rain just keeps coming. Most of the southeast U.S. continues to see rainfall even as the hurricane season comes to a close. Is El Niño still threatening? Will we continue to stay wet? These answers and more as Jeff, Chris, and I talk about these issues in the November edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Let's take a look at the 30-day precipitation, and we see lots of red colors there on the map, meaning 5 or more inches of rain over the last 30 days, which has produced plenty of flooding and full reservoirs across the southeast. The drier areas have been along the Carolina coast there and in Florida this November, which is typical for the Florida Peninsula this time of year. We can see how this compares to normal, and we see most areas well above normal, especially from Georgia there through the Carolinas, where we see several inches or more above normal there in the darker blue and purple colors. And the stream flows are responded to all this rain. As you can see, many of the streams and rivers much above normal from the Florida Peninsula, or from the Florida Panhandle to southern Virginia. The upper St. Johns and the Florida Peninsula show there with the red and orange dots is the only area there that we have in the southeast where stream flows are actually below normal. So, of course, drought really is not an issue, except we do see some slight moderate drought there on the east coast of Florida in line with the upper St. Johns River Basin, where we see where we just had talked about the much below normal stream flows. Most other areas are doing fine as far as drought in the southeast, outside some spotty areas along the east coast there in Georgia and South Carolina. Rain has been the rule across the southeast this fall, and much of it has come in the form of tropical systems. We typically see about 2 to 3 storms a year in the southeast, but this year, of the 16 tropical systems in the Atlantic basin that formed, 4 of them affected the southeast, and 2 especially brought flooding to the region. We see the chart here going back to the 1950s and see that the last 3 seasons we have seen 4 or more storms affect the southeast, many bringing extreme flooding. The 4 we had this year were Alberto in late May, which was an early storm, Gordon, which brushed the area in early September, which was followed up quickly by Florence in mid-September. And then we had Michael in October, which brought another round of significant river flooding for the parts of the Carolinas and Virginia.
We're beginning the period with high pressure across much of the area. As this area of high pressure moves eastward, we'll see a return to more active weather with a cold front moving towards us as we go into the weekend. This will lead us into the midterm period, beginning with a front and the associated precip across the southeast. The latter portion of the midterm period is also expected to be active. There's more uncertainty in how this next round of precip moves across us, but models are calling for another front to move into the southeast. The 7-day precipitation forecast shows contributions from both the short-term and midterm periods, with the caveat again being that the forecast for the midterm period will undergo changes as that next round of precip gets closer in time. The long-term forecast is for above normal precipitation amounts, with the potential for another round of precip that next weekend.
Well, thank you, Chris. Now let's take a look at the Pacific equatorial sea surface temperatures and see here that they are above normal and look to remain above normal through the winter and into the spring. These temperatures are not the only thing that is looked at when assessing El Niño conditions. During an El Niño, we often see convection or thunderstorm development near the date line and Indonesia and then further east. Well, that just isn't happening right now. However, we expect that with the continued warm temperatures that convection will also begin to develop. El Niño conditions are likely to be around through the spring, and this means a few things. First, let's address the December forecast from the Climate Prediction Center. Temperatures look to remain near normal for this time of year, with a bit warmer than normal in South Florida. However, the month is shaping up to be a wet one over most of the southeast. The one exception in our furthest west area in Mississippi and northern Alabama, there's a gradient between the above normal and below normal area. It's a very tight one. And we will have to watch as weather systems develop during the month and how far west they go and how far east they end up going. The seasonal forecast puts us in full El Nino mode as we near normal temperature forecast across the southeast U.S. and, more importantly, an above normal rainfall forecast for the 3-month period. Coming off a very wet fall for most of the southeast, this leans us towards above normal flooding for this winter into spring. Due to the already wet conditions and high river levels, this could be a very active winter with respect to rainfall and flooding. And it is possible that this will continue from March into spring, as El Nino conditions do not look like they will dissipate quickly.
Okay, thanks, Todd. So back in August, we showed our flood vulnerability forecast, and we had many of our area rivers at high vulnerability. And seeing the map below, which shows the river flooding between September 1st and here today, we see that the forecast was pretty good. We highlighted the highest chances were across Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas, and we see, especially for the Carolinas and Georgia, we saw much above normal flooding for the fall period. A closer look shows the widespread significant flooding from the Carolinas, from Florence and Michael combined in September and October. So what do we expect going into the winter season? Which area rivers will be looking at potential river flooding? It looks like not much change from the fall forecast. A continued high or elevated risk of river flooding for the Carolinas, with rivers still running very high. Even the very wet fall, stream flows are running high, and the winter outlook calls for the potential of above normal precipitation. All this leads to above normal river flood risk. River flooding is common this time of year for this region, but this year, based on current soil states and much of the information that Todd talked about, we're almost probably twice as likely to have river flooding in some locations as typical. For Georgia, as we go into December and January, we head into the typical river flood season, but this year we might be slightly more elevated as far as the chance for river flooding, similar to the Carolinas, due to the same reasons I just talked about for the Carolinas. The wintertime generally brings flooding on the upper Tombigbee there this time of year, but the risk this year looks to be close to normal for that part of the area. And then finally, in the Florida Peninsula, river flooding is generally not typical as they go into their dry season. The St. Johns River is even less likely this year as they have been dry in the headwaters.
And so the bottom line, in the short term, we're at the end of the hurricane season, which is good news. However, we look to stay active, especially for the next few weeks. As for the long term, again, continued active. It's looking like an active El Nino winter flood season, and so that's why we show elevated chances for flooding both the Carolinas, Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle. Not so much as the dry season is here for Florida, and looks like things will stay fairly quiet. And then also in the western part of our area in Mississippi. We plan to record our next Water Resources Outlook on December 20th. We look forward to talking to you then.